Well, it's good to be back in God's house tonight. It just seems like time is just slipping away from us. Seems like we were just here Wednesday night for Bible study. Now it's Sunday night. Before you know it, it'll be Wednesday night again. I was talking to a lady the other day, had to order a porta-john for work. She said, we'll deliver Saturday. And I said, you do realize Saturday's the 4th of July. And she said, what? It's the 4th of July. I said, before we know it, Christmas will be here. Time is moving forward. And that is another thing that we will see as the Bible begins to fulfill. It seems like the days will get shorter. Of course, we know that one of the plagues in the Bible, I should say, one of the things that will happen during Revelation was we won't be here during that period, but that the day will actually, we will lose a third of the day and the night. Or lose a third of sunlight in the moon. It will be total darkness. But last week we finished up chapter 11, so we are beyond halfway done. We're moving into the downside of Revelation now. We're in chapter 12. So if you would take your Bibles and turn to Revelation chapter 12. It says in verse 1, And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. There appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child, as soon as it was born. She brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God, to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. The great dragon was cast out, the old serpent called the devil, and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation, and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony. They loved not their lives unto the death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea. For the devil is coming down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. To the woman were given 2 wings of a great angel, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times and a half a time, in the face of the serpent. The serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. The earth held the woman, and the earth opened her mouth, and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Father, we come to you today, God. Lord, just thanking you for the privilege to be able to open your book, to be able to open your word, to study it, God. I pray, Lord, Father, that you will help us have a better understanding, that you will help us, Lord, in understanding the things that will be taking place, Lord. But God, I pray that you will remove the fear from us, Lord, as we know, Father, as a child of you, we will not be here during this period, God. And I thank you for that. It's in your name I do pray. Now, I got my contacts in today, so if I reach up to move my glasses, I'm not crazy. It's just I'm used to being there on the face. But Revelation chapter 12. In Revelation chapter 12, we are shown 5 of the 7 personas. This is the first of 7. First of 7 great signs, or what they refer to in the Greek as megasemia, that John will relay to us this is an even greater sign. The woman here that they are referring to, or that they are using to represents a religious system in Revelation. If you remember in chapter 2, verse 20, 7 verse 20, Jezebel was used to represent false teaching. So here this woman is used to represent the truth. It says, notwithstanding I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest the woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophetess, to teach and to seduce my servant to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed unto idols. Jezebel was used to basically persuade people to do things that were not of God. They were false teachings. The Roman Catholics believe that here they're talking about Mary. But scripturally, you can back it up in the fact that this woman is identified as Israel. You can find that in Genesis 37, 9 through 11. Joseph, we all know, in the book of Genesis, what was one thing that Joseph known for? He had a dream. He could interpret. He could interpret dreams. So Joseph's dream, the sun represents Jacob, and the moon represents Rachel, which was Joseph's mother. The 11 stars are the tribes of Israel, which bow down to Joseph. If you remember, Joseph had how many brothers? Well, he was sold into slavery. What happened? Eventually they would all come to him because they were starving. If you remember, Joseph had a dream, and this is what set all that off. He had a dream that his brothers would be bowing down before him. They all got jealous. They all got mad. But what they didn't realize is this dream was talking about a time when there would be a famine in the land. They would have to come to Joseph for food. Scripturally, Israel is often described as a woman. In Isaiah 54, 1 through 6, Israel is restored as the wife of Jehovah. In Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 30, it says, surely as a wife treacherous departeth her husband, so have ye dealt treacherously with me, O house of Israel, saith the Lord. So this woman here is being this representation is being interpreted as the truth, being interpreted as possibly Israel. In verse 2 it says, and she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. When we get down to verse 5, it will clearly identify the child as Jesus. But the pain described here refers to the travail that Israel was under during Jesus' birth. They were under the Roman oppression. They were under the Roman Empire. And they faced a lot of trials. They faced a lot of tribulations. One, they were heavily taxed. Two, they really basically had to do whatever they were told to do. Or face death. You know, the Romans were the type of people, especially the Roman soldiers, they were very evil, horrible people. They didn't care. And if you owed taxes when it come tax time and you didn't have the money to pay your taxes, they would take your livestock. Or they would take your children. And it didn't matter to them. So Israel was oppressed during this time period. And in fact, when they talked about Jesus' birth, how the Messiah would come, in fact, what they thought is that Jesus would raise up an army and overthrow the Roman Empire. They had no idea that he was coming as a Savior. Now, this next time he returns, he will be returning as a king. So they were very oppressed during this time period, which would explain the birth. And we know what is that? That is also God's judgment for what? Adam and Eve sinning. the woman would experience pain during childbirth. And then she would experience pain as her children would grow up. Verse 3 says, "And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon." Anytime you see the word dragon in Revelations, that references Satan. Satan is the dragon. "Behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head." The thing I like about John is he gives great description. That's why I like the book of John so much, because he really describes who Jesus Christ is. But John gives great description here. And he is describing another sign, the appearance of the great red dragon, or Satan. The dragon has great power. He has 7 heads. He has 10 horns and the 7 crowns. What that does is that claims his royal authority against the true king. You know, old Satan thought he should be the king. You know, old Satan thought he was as good as God. And that's blasphemy. Daniel 7:8, verse 8 says, "I considered the horns and beheld there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in his horns were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things." 10 horns represent the 10 kingdoms, which are 3 of those 10 kingdoms are subdivided. It's a hard word to say. Subdivided by the little horn. When you see the word little horn, that references the Antichrist. Verse 4 says, "And his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born." Many believe here, scripturally, that this describes the 3rd of the angels who would be cast out of heaven with Satan. Because if you remember, through the great battle, Satan thought he was God. He thought, I can take over this place. There was a great battle. Satan lost. Imagine that. And 1/3 of the angels that he convinced to follow him were cast out too. So you see, Satan, many people get this so confused. They think, well, Satan, he's ugly, he's all this, but truthfully, Lucifer was the most beautifulest angel of them all. That's how he's so manipulative. It's a hard word to say. You wouldn't think someone who is beautiful would manipulate you, would you? You wouldn't think someone who is beautiful would lead you astray. But they did. And Satan led 1/3 of the angels astray. If he could convince 1/3 of the angels to follow him, how easy for him is it to convince a lost person to follow him? We don't have the mind power of an angel. But many believe that this will describe the 1/3 of the angels that would be tossed out of heaven, the 1/3 of the angels that would follow in the league of Satan. This also goes to show you how God is still in control. I'm not very good mathematically when it comes to fractions. But I do know this. If you have 3/3, that makes 1. If you take 1/3 away, you still got 2/3, which means you still got more. God is still in control. Yeah, 1/3 of the angels were cast out of heaven, but he still has a 2/3 of the angels in heaven. God is still in control. He still has the advantage over Satan. The attempt to deliver the child was initially fulfilled when Herod tried to kill Jesus as a child. If you remember when the wise men, I about said the wise guys, they weren't in the mafia, but the wise men, if you remember when they went to Bethlehem, they followed the star. They stopped and they talked to King Herod. And they told him about the babe, about the Messiah, about the king. And Herod was so afraid of losing his place. But here's the funny thing. Instead of worrying about his own son, who would eventually overthrow him anyway, or lead him to death, he was worried about little baby Jesus. What did he do? He put a decree out that all the firstborn male children should die. But just like God is in control, Joseph was visited and said, "You need to go to Egypt." So here we see another portrayal of Satan trying to devour. And what we really see is how the Bible was fulfilled when King Herod tried to kill Jesus as a child. Verse 5 says, "And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to His throne." Clearly, this scripture here, this verse refers to Jesus, refers to the Messiah. Over in Revelation chapter 19, verse 15, it says, "And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron. He treadeth the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God." So after the prince of this world came, tried, him they found nothing. Him, the Son, was called up, and he sits on the right hand of the Father. See, the prince of this world is Satan. He has no power over Jesus. That was obvious at the cross. That was obvious at the resurrection. Jesus is now sitting at the right hand of the Father, acting as an advocate for you and I, pleading our case every time we sin. Verse 6 says, "And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God, that they should feed her 63 threescore." Try that again. That they should feed her there 1,260 days. 3.5 years. This reference to the 3.5 years connects with these events with the final 7 years. If you remember the first 3.5 years, relatively peaceful. The last 3.5 years, all hell breaks loose. But these 3.5 years will connect to the events with the final 7 years of the prophecy of Daniel. If you want to get a good understanding, read Daniel. He prophesies a lot about the end of time. You see, John's not prophesying. He's giving us a revelation. But Daniel prophesied. So if you want to have something to back up, to kind of connect things together, Daniel is a good book to read. But in chapter 9 we see in verse 5 the ascension of Christ. In verse 6 describes the yet to occur events in the 70th week of Daniel. We see that she flees into the wilderness. The woman here, she flees into the wilderness, a place that is prepared by God. She's safe. Over in John chapter 14, Jesus tells us that He's going to prepare a place for us, which we know is what? Heaven. But God's plan works on earth as well. Why? Well, because He's the ruler of all. So the woman here has protection. She flees into the earth. She flees into the wilderness. God has a special place prepared for her. She will be protected. She will be fed 3.5 years. The Bible says, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. At the midpoint of the Great Tribulation, 3.5 years, God once again turns the tides against Satan. First in heaven, then on earth. See, a battle takes place between Michael and his angels, and Satan and his angels. A lot of people, like the Seventh-day Adventists and the Jehovah's Witnesses, insist, and a lot of them believe that Michael is Jesus, but Michael's not Jesus. Michael is an archangel. Gabriel is the archangel of messaging. Michael is the archangel of war. They believe he's Jesus because he has angels and because his name means one like God. But that contradicts their claim, you see. And it falls in line of all the warnings of false teaching. If they believe that, if Michael's name means one like God, then obviously he cannot be Christ. Why? Because Christ is God. So they're contradicting themselves. That's why we must stay sharp in the Word, because if someone came to you and you didn't have an understanding, you didn't really know, and they say, you know what, Michael, you know you heard about him in the Bible? He's a great angel. That's Jesus. But you know what his name means? It means that he's like God. But Jesus is God. Christ is God, the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. In the book of Jude, chapter 1, verse 9, it says, Yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, The Lord rebuke him. I'm going to give you a lot of scripture here, but Here we're going to see the powerless disciples and the might of Christ. Matthew 17:18, and Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of him, and the child was cured from the very hour. If you remember, that's when the disciples were not able to cast the demon out of the child. In Capernaum, in Mark chapter 1, verse 25, it says, And Jesus rebuked him, saying, Hold thy peace, and come out of him. Again, we see here the powerless disciples and the might of Christ. In Mark chapter 9, verse 25, it says, When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the foul spirit, saying unto him, Thou dumb and dark spirit, I charge thee, come out of him, and enter no more unto him. In Luke chapter 4, we see the temptation of Christ. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Get thee behind me, Satan. For it is written that thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. In verse 7, Satan actually thinks that he can deceive Christ. He actually thought that he could deceive Jesus as Christ is going through this temptation. He's in the wilderness. He's sleep deprived. He's hungry. Satan thinks he's weak. In verse 7, he thinks he can actually deceive Christ, and he tells him, if he will worship him, he will have it all. Now, how crazy is that to tell someone who has it all anyway? If you worship me, you'll have everything. I would imagine what was going through Christ's mind at that time is, I already have it. There's nothing you can give me that I don't have. But Satan, being Satan, thought he could tempt Christ. See, Jesus already has it all. And even if things would have been different, even if Jesus would have said, okay, let me see what you got, guess what? Satan couldn't provide anything. He couldn't have done anything for Jesus. Why? Because he's a liar. I can tell you I have $1 million in my bank, and the first person to get to can have it. But when you get there and you find a couple empty McDonald's bags that my daughter's left in the car, you're going to be mad. The first thing you're going to say is, that preacher's a liar. Satan is a liar. He can't provide anything that he says he can provide. The only thing he can provide for you is a permanent home in heaven. That's the only thing he can provide. And still, God put him there. In Capernaum, Luke chapter 4, verse 35, when Jesus rebuked him, saying, hold thy peace, and come out of him. And when the devil had thrown him in the midst, he came out of him and hurt him not. You see, that's the one thing about the Bible. The Gospels never contradict themselves. I read 3 different scriptures that talk about the same thing, but they all worded it different. They never contradict themselves. Paul says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So in regard to material battles against the believer, Satan and his angels were discarded at the cross. They can't provide anything. Paul writes in Colossians chapter 2, verse 15, and having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it, but nonetheless the battle is fought in only a way we can't imagine. Satan here, believe it or not, he has access to heaven. He had access to heaven. If you remember in Job, he appeared before God in heaven. He appeared before God, before the throne. And that's when he said, you know what? Old Job ain't as loyal as you think he is, buddy. You take everything away from him and see how fast he'll curse you. God said you can do anything to him, but you can't take his life. See, even what little power Satan does have is limited in only what God gives him. He cannot take our life. In verse 9 we see that the great dragon was cast out, the old serpent, called the devil. And Satan was deceived the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. In this verse, Satan has many titles. He's referred to as the great dragon, which means he's vicious. I never saw a dragon before, but I'm pretty sure they'd be vicious. They can breathe fire. The only dragon I know is Puff, and he was a magical dragon. But he's referred to as serpent of old, which means he is a deceiver. He's referred to as the devil, or in the Greek word diablos. And no, that's not just hot sauce, that's another word for the devil. Diablos, which means defaming or slandering. So what does that mean? The devil is an accuser. You see, he will accuse you of your sin. And God forgives you of your sin. He will accuse you of being this and being that the fact that you're so vile and dirty, that God could never love you. He will accuse you of that. He's an accuser. He's a slanderer. He does everything he can to run down the name of God and His people. He's also referred to as Satan, who is our adversary. We are in war against him. I'm sure most of the guys in here can relate, probably. He's an adversary. Remember when you would go out in the woods and you'd play army with your buddies? You always had that one guy on your team that when things got bad, he was going to jump over to the other side real quick. And he was going to tell them where all y'all was at. That's old Satan. He's an adversary. He can't be trusted. We also see that he was cast into the earth along with his angels, a third of them. In Revelation chapter 12, verse 4, the Bible gives us a description of 4 different falls of Satan. Number 1, in Ezekiel. If you want to read it, making notes or whatever, Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 14 through 16. That is from the glory. He is fallen from glorified to profane. He's gone from having access to heaven to not having access to heaven, which we see in Revelation chapter 12. Number 3, from the earth to bondage in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years. That will be when we get to Revelation 20. And number 4, from the pit to the lake of fire, which we'll also see in Revelation chapter 20. That's when he will be cast into the lake of fire for eternity. So there's 4 falls of Satan. Chapter 12, we see 2 of them, or we see 1 of them. No longer having access to heaven. He's been cast out. Him and a third of the angels. Verses 10 through 12 says, And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now has come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of His Christ, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. Remember, accuser. But they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea. For the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. Satan works of accusing. And what does it do? It only ends here when he is cast out from his access to heaven. You see, today we need that intercessor that we know is Jesus Christ. Hebrews 7:25 says, Wherefore he is able also to save them to the uttermost that come unto God by him, seeing he ever liveth to make intercession for them. 1 John chapter 2, verse 1 says, My little children, these things write unto you that ye sin not, and if any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. You see, Jesus is our advocate. Satan is our adversary. Satan is no longer allowed access into heaven. But we'll see when we get a little bit deeper, I believe it's chapter 14, maybe 16, we will see where God will actually have access to hell. But again, that goes to show His authority. Satan's not allowed in. Verse 11 says that victory came. Why? By the blood of the Lamb. By the word of their testimony. They loved not their lives unto earth, but they had 3 keys to victory over Satan for the saints. They were overcome by the blood. Hebrews 9:14 says, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? Romans 5:8 says, but God commandeth his love toward us, and that we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. You see, the accusations of Satan mean nothing. Why? Because Christ has already paid the debt with his blood. It's paid for. He can say, hey God, he done this. He messed up. Are you listening to me? And Jesus can say, Father, I paid for it. I took care of that at Calvary. And God will look back at him and say, what sin are you talking about? I've already forgotten. Cast it out as far as the east is to the west. Christ has paid the debt. So when the devil tells you that God does not love you, that you're a sinner, remind the devil that he's a liar. As Mr. Brown would say, and I love that TV show, The Browns, the devil is a liar. That's all he is a liar. That's all he's good at, is telling lies. They overcame, number 2, by testimony. Knowing and remembering God's work in their lives protects them from Satan's deception. As a faithful witness, they have a testimony. We all have a testimony, right? Some people's testimony are greater than others. You know, when I first got called into the ministry, I went and talked to a dear preacher friend of mine. He led me to the Lord when I was a young kid. I told him, I said, I don't really feel like my testimony is that strong. Because I've never been drunk. I've never been on drugs. I've never smoked. I've never been to jail. I've not done anything relatively bad other than I walked away from God for a few years. Which is worse than being a drunk and a drug addict. But he said, you know what? That's what makes your testimony powerful. We've all done things in our life that we're not proud of. But it just sounds so much better when a person can get up in front of a church and give their testimony and they say, you know, I was a drug addict and I was a thief. I was in jail most of my life. And then I found God. People think, man, that was amazing. This guy went through a lot. I just think he went through a lot. But you know, the same testimony is if you stand up in front of somebody and say, you know what? I was a sinner. Never been to jail. Never been drunk. Never done drugs. But I was a sinner. But I'm here to tell you that through the power of Christ, through the blood of Christ, my debt has been paid. Satan no longer can accuse me of anything. We all have a testimony. Everybody's testimony is different. My testimony is different from yours. Yours is different from mine. But we all have a testimony. We all have to protect our testimony. So once your testimony is broken, you never get it back. So number 2, the second key is we overcame by testimony. We know that through God, what God has done for us, that we don't have to fall under the accusations of the devil anymore. And we should be faithful to witness it. The testimony you and I have is a testimony that Satan will try to ruin. He'll try to do anything he can. Generally by bringing up your past. Well, the past is already gone. God has forgotten that. But true testimony will overcome the lies of the devil. In John chapter 9, the young man, blind from his birth, was healed. And the Pharisees asked him about that healing. And they said to him, this man that healed you, is he a sinner? blind man said, whether he's a sinner or not. Whether he's a sinner or not, I know not. All I know is that I was blind. And now I see. The only thing he knew was that he could not see until Jesus came by. And now he can see. You see, the Pharisees were trying to accuse Jesus of being demonic, being a sinner. They were trying to accuse Jesus of being a false witness. But you know what's so amazing? All those Pharisees there who probably had perfect vision, none of them could see the truth, and the blind man had to tell them. All I know is that I was blind. Now I see. In John chapter 9, verse 25, he answered and said, whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. Number 3, they overcame. They did not love their lives to the death. Loving not their lives overcomes Satan's violence. They did not cling to their earthly lives, and because of that, the saints overcame. And because of that, no threat can bring against them, that Satan can bring against them is useful. You see, the saints overcame. They weren't concerned about their earthly lives. They weren't concerned about dying for the name of Christ. They were concerned about their heavenly lives. And nothing that Satan can do or bring against them would be useful. Philippians 1:21 says, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. The ancient Greek word for love is agape, which speaks of a self-sacrificing love. It's up to us to decide, will we love or like our earthly things over our heavenly things? Will we choose to think that our earthly possessions are more precious to us, or be okay with losing them? Mark 8:35 says, for whosoever will save his life shall lose it. But whosoever shall lose his life for my sake, and the gospel is the same, shall save it. They overcame the 3 keys: the blood, the testimony, the fact that they were not selfish, and they did not choose their earthly lives. Verse 12, we see that Satan is evicted from heaven. And it's a rejoiceful time. But the old saying, our loss is heaven's gain. We always say that when we lose a loved one, our loss is heaven's gain. Well, here it can be said backwards. Heaven's gain is the earth's loss. Why? He was cast to the earth. He knows he only has a short time. You know, they say Satan is like a lion ready to devour. He knows he only has a short time. If you knew you only had a short time, what are you going to do? You're going to work as hard as you can, right? If you knew today that tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. you were going to die, you're going to live life to the fullest till 3:30 p.m., right? Satan knows he only has a limited of time, and Satan is like that animal that you back into the corner. He's going to fight. He's going to fight ferociously till the end. The only question is, are we going to stand there and fight with him, or are we going to be scared and run? And he knows his time is limited. See, that's another thing that shows the authority of God. He's on limited time. He's on borrowed time. So you can say, well, that's the same for us. My time's not borrowed. Your time's not borrowed. If God says it's time to go, guess what? I'm going to live forever anyway. Verses 13 through 16, we'll finish it up here. I'll get close to finishing up. And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out his mouth, water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. The earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. Israel, from the time of Abraham, has been a critical role, a pivotal role in God's plan. So once again, Satan does what? He tries to bring tribulation to Israel. In Exodus chapter 19, verse 4, "Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself." Nourished for 3.5 years. It's given another reference to the persecution of Israel that takes place during the 70th week of Daniel in chapter 9. Jesus speaks of the desolation from Daniel in chapter 9 in Matthew 24 verses 15 through 22. Jesus is telling them to flee. There will be a time when they'll flee and they'll hide themselves in caves. We see God's ultimate protection of Israel. In Isaiah 59:19, so shall they fear the name of the Lord from the west, and His glory from the rising of the sun. And the enemy shall come in like a flood. The Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against him. Once again, we see that God has protected the woman for Israel. Verse 17, we'll finish up. "And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." It is precisely here when Satan has lost the battle for the souls of the saints in heaven. In fact, that he begins to be fruitless in the persecution of the bodies. None of his accusations stick with God when it comes to the saints. We see Satan's continued attack on Israel and the Gentiles who come to faith during the tribulation, and who will not submit and worship the Antichrist. He will make war with them. In Revelation chapter 6, if you remember, in verses 9 through 11, we saw the martyr remnant. In chapter 7, 9 through 17, we see the Gentiles saved during the tribulation. Here, John gives us a good perspective of Satan. He also gives us a good perspective of God's authority and the fact that God is still in control, no matter what. Next week we'll be in chapter 13, and we'll see the 144,000. This book is getting good. We're almost coming to the end. God is not trying to hide anything.